This is a short tutorial on college reading strategies for anyone who is currently in a college course that requires a lot of reading, or for anyone who is going to be starting a college course soon. This session is focused on textbooks. We will offer 2 other sessions on how to read monographs, whole books for courses, and another one on how to read when you have readings coming from a lot of different sources for one session or test. One of the most important things to think about in general when it comes to getting college work done is keeping yourself motivated. Some of us are motivated by the learning itself. We enjoy it and we just want to do it. But even those of us who are intrinsically motivated like that sometimes need additional motivators or things that remove distractions for us. And others of us always need somebody or something keeping us accountable. So it's important to know how you function in general and think about that as you try to set your reading goals. One thing that can be helpful no matter how you function is to set smaller goals for yourself. So especially when it can feel very overwhelming, instead of saying that you have to read an entire chapter or maybe even 2 or 3 chapters of a textbook for a week or for a single class, tell yourself you're going to read for an hour and sit down and get that reading done. You can stay focused, and when you're done, you can give yourself a reward of some kind. Or if you're thinking in terms of trying to take notes and review and figure some things out for a test, you could, instead of saying, okay, I have all of these vocabulary words that I need to make sure I know the definitions for, set yourself a goal that's more manageable and say, for example, I'm going to get the definitions for 5 of these words, get them onto flashcards or some other kind of review. And when I'm done with that, I can take a short break. Of course, if you find that getting 5 vocabulary words done doesn't take nearly as long as you thought it would, and you're done in 15 minutes, then set yourself a goal to work on maybe 5 more. But just thinking in terms of you have the whole thing to do compared to, okay, my goal right now is to do this, can help to keep you motivated. And having that reward at the end can be great for all of us, especially for those of us who need something external keeping us motivated. You can also have someone helping you to stay accountable, a friend in the class that you study with. You can set yourself a timer on your phone so that you know that when that timer goes off, you need to have a certain amount done. Whatever it is that works for you, find something that works for you to keep you motivated and use that strategy. And if you find that over time it stops working, know that too, and shift and find a new strategy. As far as the rewards go, obviously depending on how much time you have and how much work you've actually gotten done, those kinds of rewards can vary, but if it's snack time, then you know that when you get this done, you can have a snack, or it's time to go to dinner. Or maybe you know that when you're done with this, it'll be a chance to rest or a chance to go play a game with your family members, or to go play basketball with your friends, whatever you know is coming next that's enjoyable for you. Have that to look forward to, and that can help you to keep motivated to get things done. I also mentioned that distractions can be a problem, even for those of us who are motivated to read and to learn. We have so many distractions now with our smartphones and our tablets. So think about what things distract you from getting your reading done and distract you from focusing as much as you should. Sometimes those distractions are difficult or impossible to remove, especially if you live at home, if you have family to take care of. If you have to study in noisy places, those kinds of things can be harder to deal with, but do as much as you can. Unless you know that you have to be ready to answer the phone because there's an emergency call coming in, and you're just trying to get a little bit done right now in between, waiting for that phone call. If this is your focused study time, turn your phone over, put it away, silence it, turn off any kinds of apps and notifications with those apps for things like emails. If you're working from a laptop or a tablet, close up those email apps if you can. If you don't need the internet, put it in airplane mode. Anything you can do to remove any of those distractions, those text messages that come through, the phone calls that come through that you really should ignore, but then when you see them coming, do what you can to get rid of those distractions. If noises bother you, use noise canceling headphones if you can. Listen to music if it's not a distraction. If it is, another option would be white noise. Lots of different options nowadays for white noise through different kinds of music apps. All of these things can help you to stay focused, know what your distractions are, and do as much as you can to remove them. So those are some general things to think about, not just for textbook reading, but for reading and studying for college in general. For this session, to think about textbooks, you're going to need several things. You'll need a print or digital edition of a textbook, and if you don't have one of your own, then there are some instructions here to the right on this slide that you can go through to get a free digital textbook. You'll need to create an account, but you can do that for free, and then just go through these steps to actually download the PDF, and you can work from this psychology textbook. If you have a course you are taking already and you want to work through that textbook because you've got a reading assignment now or one that's coming up, you can certainly do that instead. Or if you have a textbook from a course you've already taken that you just want to use instead of using this digital textbook, that would be fine as well. But get yourself a textbook, pause this video if you need to go through the download process, and also get yourself some note-taking supplies. Paper and writing utensils are really recommended. It's actually better for your brain to be able to process things if you at some point in the note-taking process actually write down notes. That doesn't mean you can't organize things into a Word or Google Doc at some point, especially for review, but at some point in your note-taking process you do want to do some writing. So get some note-taking supplies, and if this is for a course that you've taken, are taking, or are going to take, if there are other relevant course materials, those would be great to have as well. So if you need to, pause this video while you gather those things. So first thing that you want to do with the textbook that you have is take a look at its layout and its contents. And to do that, I want you to do two things. Scroll through the table of contents, or if you've got a physical copy of a book, page through it, see what the different chapter topics are, see if there are any units or sections and what those are, and especially if there is a section that you are working on right now, or in the case of the psychology textbook you downloaded, that chapter 1 that we are going to look at, does it break anything down into units or sections, or does it break the chapter itself down into any smaller parts? And then if you are taking this for a course and you have other materials from that course, is there a syllabus or a Moodle or Blackboard site for the course, or anything else that might help you to situate your reading within the content of the course? It's good to know what you're reading for before you sit down and start reading. So pause this again if you need to as you page through or scroll through, and just get a sense of how the textbook in general is laid out. So it's good to get into a habit of doing this. Obviously, as you go through a course, you don't need to return to the table of contents every single time you read a chapter, but it can be helpful when you're at the start of a new unit to pay attention to what that unit is, and maybe go back and look at what the chapters are for that unit as you go into maybe the first chapter of that unit, it can help you to situate that particular chapter within the larger scheme. And then also looking at other course materials can help you to think about where this particular chapter fits into what you're learning for the course. If you don't understand how it fits at first before you start reading, that's okay. But you should have a better sense by the time you're done reading. When you're done reading that chapter, you should be able to say, okay, so what was it about and why is it relevant for this course, or how does it fit into this course or fit into this textbook, or maybe both. If you can't answer that question, at least on a general level, then you're probably going to want to go back and look again, maybe talk to your professor, talk to some other students in the course because maybe you missed something. Sometimes it's a matter of the professor clarifying when you get to a lecture, but professors usually don't mind if you ask them questions. They would much prefer that you try to understand than that you sit in the dark and come into class without a clue as to what's going on. So don't be afraid to get in touch with your professors and ask those kinds of questions. I have the beginning of the table of contents for the psychology textbook that you may have downloaded. As you can see with this textbook, there are no units for this particular textbook. It just goes chapter by chapter, but every chapter has some topics underneath. The chapter that we will look at, if you're looking at this textbook, is chapter 1, and it only has one subdivision under the origins of psychology, and that is the history of psychology. But if you look at, for example, chapter 3, when you get to biological psychology, now it's broken down into two major topics, the brain and nervous system, and hormones and behavior. So you would want to, after finishing chapter 3, go back and make sure that you could explain how the brain and nervous system fit into biological psychology and how hormones and behavior do. If you can't answer that question, that's the time to go back and look at the reading again and make sure that you catch that. So now you have an overview of what the textbook looks like, what the topics are, what it might be about, and maybe even how it might fit into the course. Now I want you to take a look at chapter 1 if you are using this psychology textbook that you've downloaded, or if you have a textbook of your own for a course you haven't started yet, then go to whatever is the beginning chapter of that textbook. It might be an introduction, it might be chapter 1, whatever is considered the beginning of that textbook. Or if you're in the middle of a course right now, whatever chapter is assigned next, you could look at. But go to a chapter, look through it for chapter headings, look for major ideas, and look for key points. And then also, after you've paged or scrolled through and looked at what those major headings are, look at the beginning and the end of the chapter. Usually with textbooks, the way they're formatted, sometimes at the beginning, more often at the end, but sometimes both, you've got some clues as to what the major points of that chapter are. You might find some objectives listed, some discussion questions, some vocabulary to think about. There might even be an outline of some kind that might be helpful. Look at the beginning and the end of the chapter and see what's there so you can get a sense of what you're going to be getting into as you read the chapter. So just do that first thing, number 1, and pause this video so that you can do that. Look through the chapter and get a sense of what's there, and then you can unpause the video when you have a general sense of that. Now that you've looked at the overall layout of the chapter, I want you to choose one key point or a question if there are some discussion questions, maybe a vocabulary word, maybe an objective of some kind. Choose one of those and try to skim through the chapter to try to find that. See if you can find a place in the chapter where that particular point or question or word is discussed. And just make note of where it is. You might highlight or underline. Just be careful not to highlight or underline too much. You don't want to highlight or underline an entire paragraph. Just highlight or underline what seems to be the most important word or phrase, or maybe several words or phrases, something that will call your attention to it so that you can go back to it later. You might also make a note about which page provides information. So if you see that the vocabulary word is mentioned on page 54, for example, you go back at the end of the chapter and put page 54 there. Or if you're not writing in your textbook because you are going to return it for a refund or sell it, then you can maybe have a notebook where you're keeping track of the vocabulary and just put in parentheses where that word is, and then you'll know when you come back through where to find it. But just as a practice, pick one of those and go through and try to find it. When you've done that, pause the video until you've done that, and then you can unpause it to move forward. Okay, so I've had you do several things here because I wanted to make a couple of points. When you are reading a textbook chapter, you shouldn't just start reading. You want to look around first. If it's the beginning of a course, the beginning of the textbook, it's a good idea to look at the whole table of contents. But again, like I said, if you're looking at a new unit, you might go back to the table of contents and see what other chapters are in the unit. You want to just get a general sense of how things are situated in the textbook and in the course. And you want to get a sense then also within that chapter of what the main ideas are, the key points, the questions to think about, the vocabulary, so that you can be prepared to take notes that address those things as you read. The whole point of all of this is to be able to read effectively. You don't want to just sit down and start reading from beginning to end and find out that you got, when you're halfway through, that you're not even sure what you're doing or what anything is about. So use everything that's there, all of those clues for the way the textbook is formatted and the information the professor gives you about the course to figure out how the information fits into the bigger picture. The brain needs to be able to make connections if you want to move things from short-term to long-term memory. So if you have something to connect it to before you even start to read, then you're going to be better off. And that's harder to do at the very beginning of a course, especially if it's a topic you've never taken before. It will become easier as time goes on. It will also become easier as you get a better sense of the expectations of the professor. One other thing to think about, you shouldn't just read your textbook. You also need to review, especially if you have tests and quizzes to take. And some things to think about when it comes to reviewing. You don't want to wait until it's time for the test, or especially if there's a midterm, until a week or two before the test to start to review. Review within 24 hours. If you can do that, even if you hit the key points and don't necessarily go back over every vocabulary word, but make sure that your notes are filled in, make sure that you have a good idea of what the main points of the chapter were, and maybe even start to organize those ideas into some kind of scheme for study. That's going to help you move that information from short to long-term memory. It's also going to make sure that you don't have to do all of your review and organization at the end when you're going to have less time and there's more time for you to forget everything. It's important too to know what you're going to have to study for. Sometimes when you do reading, you don't have a test to take. You might have to write a paper. And in that case, your preparation might be a little bit different, but still it's helpful to review. In that case, you might go back and take some notes about what the key questions are that were asked and how they were addressed, rather than maybe trying to memorize vocabulary words. But knowing those kinds of things will help you as well as you read and pay attention to the information and then review and make sure that you've got what you really need to have from that chapter. So hopefully this session has helped you to think about some steps you can take to create some strategies for textbook reading that will make you a more efficient reader. At the beginning, it's going to take a little extra time as you get these practices into habits for yourself, but after some time, if you keep doing this, it will become kind of second nature. And you should be in the habit of going through basically 3 major steps when you are reading a textbook. You want to preview it, so look at how it's situated in the textbook and within a course. And you want to set up some notes so that you are ready to take efficient notes, even if that's just knowing what vocabulary words there are and maybe what kinds of main topics are available. You want to view the chapter, right? That means actually read it and stop after each main section to check for understanding. If you can say what that section was about, maybe take a few brief notes on that based on what you understand, and then maybe you've underlined or highlighted or made notes about where there are some things that you need to go back to. You can move on. Just make sure that you underline and highlight sparingly. If you highlight whole paragraphs or major sections of paragraphs, it can be really hard for you to sort out what information you need to go back to. Just highlight or underline those keywords and phrases that help you to remember where the information is. And then finally, after previewing and viewing, you want to review. Look back at those notes within 24 hours, fill in any important gaps while the reading is still relatively fresh in your mind, and begin to organize for a test review if that's necessary, or organize for a paper if you're going to have to write something about it. So the main points of this session are applicable not just to textbooks, but to any kind of college reading. Reading effectively involves several things. It involves understanding the bigger picture of the course and the reading, not just those details, but also how does it fit into the whole course? Why are we even studying hormones in the context of a psychology course? It also involves knowing which details to remember and which to gloss over. You will get a sense of that as the course goes on. The professor will hopefully give you some clues, and if not, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to say, do you expect us to know names and dates for our psychology exams, or is it really about understanding the concepts? The professors should be willing to tell you at least that much, or a teaching assistant if you're in a school that has that kind of setup. Reading effectively also involves organizing reading notes for class sessions, for tests and or papers. Whatever it is you're reading toward, you want to have your notes organized for those particular goals. And then it involves reviewing what you read within 24 hours, and again later, of course, for whatever it is you're working toward again, those papers, those tests, those projects. I hope this session has been helpful, and I hope that you'll be able to join us for the next session as well.